Hi there, it's Nicole for Lawn Fawn, and today's card showcases the new Yay Kites and Big Scripty Words stamps and coordinating dies. I've paired them with the large A2 sized cross-stitched rectangle die for my background. I'm going to start by die cutting that background from some smooth white cardstock. My cardstock was a scrap that I had, and it's about the same size as this rectangle, or exactly the same size, so I simply taped it in place, and it's really not die cutting the edge like it would from a larger sheet of paper, but just adding that great cross-stitched decorative edge all the way around. Once I have that die cut, I'm going to go ahead and grab my stamps. I've already kind of laid them out to see how I want the placement to be. And I'm going to stamp my greeting. I'm pairing the greeting, the thanks greeting from Big Scripty Words, with a phrase from the older Pizza My Heart stamp set. It's not really that old. It's only from a few months back. But that way my greeting is going to be a little bit longer. I like the combination of a scripty greeting with kind of a more typewriter type font, or these aren't really typewriter. I guess it's just a little bit more of a simple type font. So once I have those, and I'm sprinkling on some white embossing powder, I stamp those with Versamark ink. I'm going to heat that with my heat tool. And then I'm going to do a little reverse or embossed resist. I did sprinkle on a little bit more embossing powder. I was going to heat it again, but I decided against that, so I just kind of wiped it off with my powder tool. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and start applying some distress inks. Now, because I'm applying this to smooth white cardstock and not watercolor cardstock, I'm using a much lighter hand so that I don't get any of those ink tool marks in my cardstock, which I find happens a little bit more and it's not as easily fixed as it would be with a watercolor cardstock. I'm using peacock feathers, twisted citron, and squeezed lemonade distress inks, kind of leaving a very light kind of white area there in between the squeezed lemonade and twisted citron. Once I have the inks all blended, I'm going to take a dry paper towel and buff off the embossed area to get any of that ink that was sitting on top of the embossing off. So my greeting reads, "Thanks, you're the greatest." Next, I'm going to take another scrap of smooth white cardstock and some black ink. This is the Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. It's great for Copic coloring. I'm going to stamp the bunny, the squirrel, my kites, the kite strings, all of the images that I am using from the Yay Kites stamp set on some smooth white cardstock, and then I'm going to color them in. Now, I am using the two cloud designs from the Yay Kites stamp set. I just will stamp those and color them, or add a touch of color to them here in a little bit. I started with my critters and the kites. I'm stamping each of them with the black ink, cleaning my images on a scrubber pad, and then putting them back on the stamp sheet before I start coloring. I have listed the Copic colors that I am using along the bottom of the screen. I went with really kind of light pastels instead of maybe the more traditional, vibrant primary colors that you see on kites a lot of times. I wanted my colors to really blend in pretty with my background. I did the addition of that kind of peachy pink there in one of the sections, but other than that, the three other colors are very similar to the colors in the background on the card. So I am just going to mix those up on the two kites. I am going to use the exact same colors, just kind of change the order that I color them in on the smaller kite. I'm only using about 2 shades per color, except with the exception of the peachy pink. I think I used about 3 for that first time, but I went to just 2 for this second kite. Again, just laying down my base color, the lightest color, and then going in and adding some definition and shading with my darker color. Almost used the green there with my yellow. I went back and blended a little more even on my first kite. Because these are lighter colors, they are going to have a lot more colorless blender in them. So you want to be careful when coloring or going over the color too many times right in a row, because your colors could definitely bleed outside the lines a little bit easier than they might normally. So if you need to go back and add some shading, I would suggest to go back and do that. Let it dry for a few seconds or whatever, and then go back. My bunny is going to be a combination of E40 and E43. I lay down the base color of E40, and then I'm going to add some nice shading with E43, blend that out. I ended up going over this a couple of times simply because it blended out way too much the first couple of times. So I'll go back in, add a little bit more of the E40 so I get some nice definition there where there's going to naturally be some darker areas. Once I have him colored the way I want him to look, I am going to go in with my darker color and add some dot detail to really add some fun definition to the bunny and give it just kind of, it's one of my favorite ways to add kind of some great detail to critters. I added a little R00 to the cheek, and that E43 using the dot detail is going to definitely give some darker areas as well. For the squirrel, I'm using E30 and E34. My base color is E30. Then I'll use my darker color, the E34. Again, when I go back with my lighter color, I think it blends it out too much, so I ended up going over my image a couple of times until I got the shading just right. Here's where I'm going in and adding that darker color again. You could even go in with a third color if you wanted to. My goal here was to keep my critters on the lighter side so they blended in better with the rest of the pastels going on in the card. So I didn't want to really pull in too much more dark color simply because I thought it wouldn't coordinate very nicely with the rest of the images. Next, I have trimmed apart my coordinating Yay Kites dies. I am going to go ahead and tape all of them that I can in place. I think I ended up being able to tape all of them in place. I left enough room. Once I have all of the dies taped in place using some Post-it tape, I'm going to run this through my Big Shot die cutting machine, trying to make sure I get that balloon string exactly the way it's supposed to go. The Post-it tape simply helps keep the dies from migrating towards one another if you have the magnetic platform. If you don't have the magnetic platform, I highly recommend taping them in place so they don't move. If you're using one die with the magnetic platform, it usually stays where it's supposed to go. If you use more than one, they tend to migrate towards one another. I'm going to stamp multiples of my clouds, 3 of the large, 2 of the small, go around the outside edge of each of the clouds, just kind of tracing that black stamped line with BG10. Once I have that color laid down, I'm going to take the coordinating Yay Kites cloud dies and die cut all of my clouds. I'm using some snip scissors to cut those apart. When dies are nested like they are, when there's tons of, little pieces, you definitely need something like some snips scissors to cut them apart easily. I'm going to lay out all of my pieces now before I secure anything to the background and make sure I like how it's going to look. I want some of the kite strings to be in front of the clouds, some to be behind. I'm just kind of playing with the placement, seeing what I like before I start or commit to adhering anything on my card design. Once I kind of have the placement the way I want, I'm going to go ahead and take some bling glue dots and start attaching all of the pieces to the background. You could use whatever adhesive you like. I tend to like some glue dots because I think they work great for such small pieces like some of these stamped and die cut images. But a regular adhesive or liquid adhesive would work as well. Now I did use a little liquid adhesive for the thin kite strings because they are so teeny tiny, and I think even the smallest glue dots are going to be a bit wider than the actual kite string. Go ahead and attach my cloud here before I attach that smaller kite. And I'm also flipping and rotating my clouds a little bit so that they aren't all going the exact same way. Go ahead and move over to the other side and attach some clouds here. Another thing to note is some of my clouds, or at least a couple of them, plus the kite up at the top, are going to be hanging off the edges of the background, and I'll trim off the excess. That really kind of helps ground everything so it doesn't appear that everything's just kind of floating out in thin air. I'm going to take a black glaze pen and add detail to the eyes on both of the critters. I'm also going to take the Wink of Stella clear glitter brush pen and trace around the edges of the clouds where I added that BG10 Copic marker for a little bit of sparkle on each of the clouds. Plus, I'm going to completely color over the kites themselves to give them a touch of glitz and glimmer as well. Very subtle, but it adds a really pretty sparkle and shine. I thought I might add some white detail, but I decided against that and went just with the Wink of Stella pen instead. And the final thing is I'm going to take a scattering of Pretty Pink Posh iridescent heart confetti. These are little mini confetti pieces that I think really set off pastels really well. I love how they look, and they add a really fun touch to backgrounds. And I'm simply adding little bits of the Ranger Multi-Matte Medium all over my card and then attaching the small confetti pieces to that. They are so teeny tiny, I don't really know a better way to attach them to a card than with something like the matte medium. It dries nice and clear. It's not going to be shiny when it dries. It'll be matte, so it definitely doesn't show up that well, and you don't see the adhesive. Thanks for watching this video showcasing the Lawn Fawn Yay Kites and Big Scripty Words stamps and dies. The supplies I've used are listed and linked below the video on YouTube. Please subscribe for weekly card making and stamping videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.